we have, I can't tell if we have more or less than last week, but the back row's full. So that's back to usual. Just no Kyle.
The unruly back row.
Yeah.
Sorry, you have to say it.
Apparently, yeah. So we're back to our normal schedule. Yeah. Are you Kyle today? The position's open. Okay, let's pray. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Father, thank you for this morning, for the time to discuss some things further about how to take better care of our bodies. I pray for your blessing on this time. Thank you for all you give us in your name. Amen. Recording? Emily? Okay. Okay, so no Bible verses today, and that's pretty much the way it's going to be going forward. Okay, we're all here because I assume all of you are convinced that taking care of your bodies is important and biblical. Okay, so we established that last week. We talked about it. I'm not going to support anything I say biblically going forward. This is purely about how the body works. Okay, it's very applicational. Now, the way that each of these, because every class is going to be different from last week, right? Last week was framing and some perspective and things like that. Everything going forward is going to be a little bit more, this is how things work and this is what to do about it, okay? And the whole class is structured that way. We have the next 10 weeks to do this. And so a lot of the earlier classes, here in the next few weeks especially, are going to be a little bit more theoretical. So just do your best to kind of hang on. If you have questions, ask them. I'll clarify as much as possible. Toward the end, especially the last 3 weeks, is going to be now what do you do about it? It's going to be a little bit more directly applicational, but I want to build that foundation of need and understanding so that then you can apply how do I design a lifestyle around being a good steward of my body. It's not going to be that hard, it's not going to be that complicated, but I want to establish a sort of base framework of sort of biology, if you will. I mean, this isn't like biology 101 in that sense, but how does the human body work and how does it function? And then you kind of learn later on how to take care of it. Because if I told you how to take care of it first, you wouldn't know why. Kind of makes sense? So today is going to be really nerdy. We're going to talk about hormonal and metabolic health. I struggled with how to order this, and so I just picked one. Because the reason why is because they're both interrelated, and they both give feedback both ways. So it's not like one necessarily flows down through the other, although you could make the argument that metabolic health flows down into hormonal health more than the other way around, but they both are interrelated, and the feedback loops are sort of circular. So I chose to do hormonal first, but as I'll kind of explain later, they kind of go both ways, and the tail does kind of wag the dog in a certain sense. So has anybody ever heard of HPTA, or the negative feedback loop that is the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis? Yeah, I know, right? Okay, so the way that the human body works as it pertains to most of your hormones is based on what we call a negative feedback loop. Does anybody know what that means? When there's not enough, the body says, make more. That's it, okay? So your body doesn't necessarily wait in the classical sense. There's daily rhythms, there's monthly rhythms with women, things like that, okay? And so what that means is as hormones are released, there's a threshold. Unless this imaginary line, don't know where it is, it's okay. They're created, they're released, goes down, gets below that threshold, the body says, oh, we need to make more. Okay, that's what a negative feedback loop is. When the body discerns that there's not enough, it's time to make more, okay? That's really simplistic. Very, very simplistic, but that's what we're going to go with. So we'll talk about men first because men are way more simple. As you get into the biology of male versus female, you will learn that everything about men is less complicated. So the stereotypes hold up all the way down to physiology, okay? Men just work in a much simpler manner. The interplay of hormones amongst each other is just a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more linear. It's just like there's way less variables. We'll talk a little bit about, because everyone's heard advertisements for hormone replacement, stuff like that. We'll talk a little bit about it. Even hormone replacement with women, about 10 times more complicated if done competently. Men are just like, oh, yeah, okay, we're good, do that easy. So it's a complicated biological process. God made it the way he made it for his own reasons. Men are just simpler and easier to talk about. So this chart, I could have just graphed how testosterone works on men on a daily basis. It's that simple. Every day, a man in the morning makes most of his testosterone. You see at the top, I said LH, FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. These luteinizing hormone is responsible for signaling the creation of sperm, and follicle stimulating hormone is responsible for the creation of testosterone in the gonads. Now, that signaling happens in the morning, usually, I believe, around 2 hours after you wake up, give or take. This is all variable, but on average, about 2 hours after you wake up. How much luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone is released will determine how much testosterone you make that day, okay? However, there's a whole bunch of other variables. How sensitive are you to that luteinizing hormone and that follicle stimulating hormone? That's going to depend a lot on your biological state. So even if you're making plenty, your body might not be responding to it because of other things about your biology. And it tends to come down to your general health and well-being. If you're in a state of stress, even though your body knows it needs to make more, the release is going to be smaller. So you're going to get this, okay? We'll talk a little bit more about what leads to higher and lower levels and that kind of thing. But now testosterone in men is created independently. We don't make estrogen. We convert testosterone to estrogen, and you need it in men. Both are equally important, okay? You can't have there's a lot of junk around the internet about men only need testosterone, we don't need estrogen. We need estrogen just as much as women need it for many health reasons. We'll talk a little bit about it once we get through the female part, but the short story is it helps with your joints, it helps with your cardiovascular health, it helps with your sense of well-being. It also in men is what exclusively drives libido. So it's not testosterone. In women, this is actually completely the opposite. Works totally the opposite way as pertains to the sexual function. But with men, libido, or the frequency of interest, is driven purely by estrogen. Testosterone, as it pertains to sexual health, is what drives the, we'll say, quality of the experience, okay? Now, the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in the male body, does anybody know what tissues that occurs in? Every tissue almost. Okay? You have enzymes throughout your body, and what they do is they convert testosterone to estrogen. Every hormone your body makes, it starts out with some raw compound, right? The human body doesn't make stuff. We eat things and we convert things. And that all comes down to taking a molecule and breaking it apart. And that's through what we call enzymatic activity. An enzyme is a thing. You don't need to know exactly how it works, because honestly, we don't know how it works. It's actually getting into the quantum, biology type of realm. They don't know how it works. But essentially what it does is it'll take a molecule and break off a piece of it. And if you look at the testosterone molecule and the estrogen molecule is a smaller molecule that looks pretty much the same. It has pieces of it hacked off, okay? This happens in all the target tissues in your body. Mostly it happens in your eyes, it happens in your joints, it happens actually in your fat cells. So if you have more fat, more body fat, you're gonna have more estrogen conversion. This is why some men have low testosterone, because even though they're making lots of testosterone, they might be making plenty, they basically convert say an excessive portion of it into estrogen. And so you can make all you want, but it's sort of going into this hole of estrogen conversion. SHBG, sexual hormone binding globulin. This exists in both men and women. This is a binding protein. Almost every hormone in your body binds to a protein, and what this basically does is slows down the release of the hormone. Because you make the raw hormone, the half-life is hours, okay? So you could make it, and then by lunchtime, you're like out of hormone. So that binds to the protein in the blood. It's made by the liver, by the way, SHBG, and that's what binds to these hormones and makes it so that the half-life is extended, because it unbinds very slowly. It binds rapidly, unbinds slowly. Keeps it so that the hormone can't do its job, so that you have a more slow, steady release. Otherwise, you could have this sort of spike in the morning, and then by the evening, you're like out, right? In women, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. Luteinizing hormone makes women do aromatize. What aromatization refers to the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. Women aromatize a small amount. Most women just make their hormone, or their estrogen, it's mostly made directly. Estrogen is mostly made directly in the ovaries through luteinizing hormone. And follicle stimulating hormone triggers the creation of testosterone. And same thing with women. Women need both. The ratios are different, of course, because they are different. But women, testosterone and estrogen are I'd say they're equally important. You can't go without one or the other. They're both very, very vital to health. As far as it pertains to systemic health, it's the same in men and women. Estrogen helps you with your eyesight, helps you with your joint health. It's going to be active in the joints, in the other connective tissues. It helps keep them more elastic. They become sort of brittle without it. And also the blood vessels, especially the major blood vessels, estrogen helps keep them a little more supple so that they have more elasticity. Sort of think of a body without estrogen as of a body that's like a dried rope. Like it frays and it breaks more easily, becomes more brittle. Progesterone. Women don't make progesterone directly. Progesterone is converted from the egg. Okay, so at mid-cycle, basically, when the egg is released, if it does not get fertilized, the woman will basically break the egg down. So I talked about hormones; they're all breaking things down. The egg is broken down into progesterone. So with a woman's cycle, I'm going off of memory here. Let me get a couple different colors. This is why the women's cycle is way more complicated than men, because these don't remain static. Men, this just does the same thing every day, more or less. Totally cool, totally easy to understand. How much you get is determined by a lot of factors, of course, but your body wants to do the same thing every day. For women, let's talk about, so the first day that a woman bleeds is the beginning of the luteal phase, okay? And then ovulation, okay? So what you're going to get is, I'll graph, so testosterone just does this. It's the one thing that doesn't really move much. Pretty much stays steady, or at least that's what the body wants. Estrogen sort of does this. Wow, there's not much left. Stays low, and then post-ovulation high, then comes down, okay? Progesterone basically follows the same curve, but it's a little bit more delayed. Progesterone's going to be more like down, it's basically down in the dumps here. There's nothing. And then it's kind of a delay, and then they both come down. That seemed fair enough? Yeah. So that's why you feel different. That's why you are tempted maybe to behave different, because your hormones go all over the place on about every 2 weeks you have a pretty significant change. What mediates all of this and kind of helps is if you have testosterone, because testosterone helps keep you sane. And a lot of modern lifestyle factors, and if you just kind of live your life as most people do in modernity, women have like no testosterone. So what does testosterone do in the brain? It does a similar thing for men and women in the brain. It provides a sort of general sense of well-being. It increases your ability to tolerate stress. So it won't make it so you don't experience stress, but it will make it so that your threshold for what overwhelms you basically goes up. So you can sort of handle more, let it roll off your back that kind of thing. It provides a sort of sense of well-being. You feel okay, like, okay, this is happening, I'm okay with it. Versus a person with lower testosterone, the same person would tend to feel overwhelmed at the same kind of stressor event, if that makes sense. So what mediates this, and that's going to be driven by health, right? So that's a really quick and dirty way to explain what's happening with women. Now, the progesterone, what does that do? That will generally provide a similar sense of well-being to the testosterone as well. It has a very similar effect mentally, usually calming, that sort of thing. And then when it's gone, you kind of lose that asset, if you will. Estrogen in women, mentally, what does it do? It tends to be energizing. But, as some women can attest, I'm sure, that can be too much. It can be hyper-stimulating, and it can make you feel irritable, that kind of thing. When it gets to a certain point, right? You can have too much of anything. And usually it's not so much the high estrogen as much as it is an imbalance, right? If you have high estrogen, if you had high testosterone and progesterone, you'd probably be fine. So it kind of does come down to ratios a bit. There aren't hard ratios because each individual woman, each individual man is going to be different. I've seen men with very, very high estrogen and decent testosterone, and they said they feel fine. So I'm like, okay, cool, leave it alone. We're not trying to establish some sort of 5-to-1 ratio, that's perfect. No numbers like that exist. You have your own genetics, you have your own predispositions. We just look at symptoms, how do you feel, how's it going? Okay, here's what we can manipulate. So there's a little bit more applicational stuff here. The sex hormone health link. So sleep. 15% reduction in testosterone production in young men during a short-term study of 5 hours nightly of sleep. So they took a bunch of young men, I think it was like 20 or 30, the link's there. Within several weeks, their testosterone reduced 15%. And remember, young men are the most resilient when it comes to hormone production. All of us in this room pretty much are no longer young, therefore your hormone production is even less resilient than these young men. So imagine what chronic months and months or years of low sleep will do to your hormone production. Diet, poor diet. Basically, the more visceral fat you have, the less testosterone you're going to have, men and women. The visceral fat is the fat that's underneath the abdominal muscles. Okay, it's inside your guts. It's in and among and around your guts. It crowds your guts. It's the least healthy fat you carry. The fat you carry outside of the abdominal wall is not the best, but you actually need some of it. Like, you shouldn't be 5% because that's near death. But any fat that's inside the abdominal wall, we want that to be nearly zero. An interesting fact, sumo wrestlers, right? Some of the fattest people in the world. They're huge people. They eat tons of food. They did scans of them several years ago to see, are these, because they don't die, while they're competing. They actually seem to be fine. But they're they're huge, right? These are 400-pound men. They did scans of them. Guess how much visceral fat they have? Less than the average population. Almost zero. When they scan their insides, these guys are specimens. They're highly muscular. They have excellent cardiovascular health. They have no visceral fat. Inside, they're the best. They're the best of the best. Why is that? Because they train like crazy people. Okay, their lives are, they train most of the day, every day. They're either doing cardiovascular training, resistance training, or they're wrestling. All day, every day. And then they sit down in the evening and they eat a massive pile of food. Now, when they stop competing, if they don't lose that weight, they're in trouble, right? Then they're now you're going to die, right? But that's why you can have these large football players. They're fine. They're going to be just fine. Strong men, people like that, they'll be fine. However, if they stop competing, if they stop training like that, stop moving like that, the visceral fat comes in, the metabolic health goes downhill, you're not going to live as long. And I do want to point out, too, that no matter what, increased body weight is a liability. Okay, and that's different for each person, but even for these guys that are doing this, there's still an orthopedic cost. your joints are still your joints, right? There's still risks associated with it. So I'm not saying that it's a zero risk thing if you exercise properly and you're huge. There's still a risk associated with it. Even me at my body weight, I'm taking a risk at walking around 260 pounds. I'm pretty lean, I'm pretty muscular, but it's a risk I personally take. And I don't advise everyone like, oh, everyone should just try to do this. I don't necessarily. It's a risk I take because I like competing. But it's not necessarily, it's a risk. I'm in the risk side of things, all right? The lower risk side of things would be for me to weigh probably about 200 pounds. Resistance training induces acute increased testosterone and growth hormone levels. Now, before anyone thinks, oh, so if I train, it's just a little bit, okay? It's just a little bit. And it's equally true of men and women. So when you're done training, it's actually enhanced if you eat carbs post-training and protein. But carbs are actually what do it because it's the insulin. So the body thinks in terms of famine and plenty. If you break down all these processes, there's this consistent thread of I'm either building or I'm conserving, all right? And that's going to drive your behavior, drive how you feel. If you train and then consume carbs, your body thinks it's in a state of plenty and is like, all right, let's release hormones because it's time to build and grow and feel good, okay? Testosterone appears to inhibit cancer and is cardioprotective. So the cardiovascular protective thing is interesting because I'm sure you've heard doctors in the mainstream talk about how testosterone destroys your heart and other things like that, and theories that men don't live as long as women because of testosterone. That's not true. There's no evidence to say that. Men don't live as long as women for a few reasons. One, we're bigger. In every single example in biology, if you average it all out, the bigger you have any animal in a species, on average, the less long they live across all mammals. Just the way it is within the same species. A bigger dog doesn't live as long as a small dog. We all know this, we all see this. It's the same for humans. On average, if you're over 6 feet tall, you're probably going to live a few less years. For a woman, like Emily's 5'2", good reason to suspect she's going to live several years longer than me because of that reason alone. Now, there's a whole lot of other variables in there. I'm talking about averages on the scale of billions, right? Cancer inhibition. So we don't know why this is, by the way, and I'm not trying to speculate why it is necessarily. My suspicion is it's not necessarily the testosterone itself, but rather the human body and environment that creates adequate testosterone because it's so healthy has less cancer. You guys following what I'm saying? But testosterone doesn't make cancer. There's a bunch of junk from the 80s and 90s that people ran around saying, oh, testosterone makes cancer, all this stuff, prostate cancer especially. We've been treating men with testosterone since the 60s. So we have a lot of data. Men who are on testosterone replacement that have very high testosterone values do not have prostate cancer at an increased rate compared to men with low testosterone than the rest of the human population. In fact, this data isn't super strong, but there's some data to suggest that prostate cancer occurs a little bit more often in men with low testosterone. I think it's actually more that it happens earlier in life, but I can't prove that. Basically, I think it's around, 2% of all men will get prostate cancer. It's a small number, but it's basically like you're probably going to get it or you're not. And when you get it is probably determined by how healthy you are, but you're pretty much like born to get it if you're going to get it, from what the data appears to indicate. You can sort of get it later in life if you're healthier, and it appears that you get it earlier in life if you're not. So I mentioned that feast, famine, and stress. So interesting about the stress, men's testosterone goes up during stress, women's goes down. Another opposite thing. Yeah, so men who endure a stressful time, during the stressful event, so when the thing happens, that you can read about this study, I can't remember exactly what method they used, but they basically stressed people out acutely. They put them through a stressful situation. And the men would enter the study and exit the study, and then they exited, they had a higher testosterone value. When they exited, they had a lower testosterone value. Why? That's the way God made you, so get over it. I don't know why, but that's how it works. I don't make the rules, I just tell you what they are. But it's something to be aware of, though, and I think that this does sort of extend to this is why God created men for certain roles and women for certain roles. Men are supposed to go out and take risks and do things like that, and women are supposed to protect and conserve in the home by God's design in general. And so I think that's why we see this kind of behavior difference, is women aren't made to go out and be protectors and face those acute stressful situations. The stress that they endure is typically going to be more steady, work-related in the home or something along those lines. Again, that feast-famine scenario, remember that all of this, if you don't remember, if you're not going to remember all the facts, remember the sort of feast-famine dichotomy in the human body. Either the body thinks it's time to build or it's time to conserve. That's going to be based on your sleep, your diet, and your activity levels, how much sunlight you're getting, how much cold exposure you're getting. We'll talk about that in a future time, like how that works, but just be aware. Thyroid. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. TSH is released by the hypothalamus also and determines how much thyroid you make, how much thyroid hormone you make that day, which is T4. This is converted from iodine. By the way, your testosterone, estrogen, all those hormones, those are created from lipids, from cholesterol or fats. Thyroid hormones are made from iodine, from the consumption of iodine. That's why we have iodized salt. Because, in the early 1900s, so over 100 years ago now, it was recognized in the West that thyroid values were dropping, and there was more and more goiters and other things like that. And so a great solution to it was all the bakers were like, well, let's just put salt or iodine in the salt. Everybody eats bread, and salt's their food. So this is why I advise it's fine if you want to use sea salt and those other salts. There's nothing wrong with them. They're all fine. But you need to get iodine in your diet somehow. So if you're going to switch to those salts, go get a dropper of iodine. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them at every drugstore or whatever. Put a drop of iodine in your coffee in the morning, something along those lines. It's easy to get. No, put it in your soup. You can put it in anything. It's almost tasteless, but you do have to get it, or you're going to have a dysfunctional thyroid, because basically your thyroid. What will happen is the thyroid stimulating hormone will go up, because your body's saying, I need more, and the thyroid won't be able to make it because it lacks the stuff it needs to convert, right? It's like putting the pedal down on the car and there's no gas. It's not going to do anything. T4, so T4 is what's manufactured directly. This also occurs on a daily basis. It happens at night, though. Typically, for most of us, it's going to be, I think it's when you sleep for about 4 hours, so 4 to 5 hours, somewhere around there. That's when your body, while you're sleeping, actually will release TSH and then creates T4. T4 is the lesser active version, still active, but lesser active version of thyroid hormone. T4 is converted to T3, I believe, in the liver, and then that is the very active version, if you will. That is active in almost every tissue in your body, reacts to T3, or just say T3 binds to it. That's going to be the brain, that's going to be the nervous system, that's going to be fat tissues, muscle tissues, your skin, everything. And even like people with low thyroid values will get thinning hair. Like even women, like some women that have thinning hair think it's their sex hormones, and it can actually be thyroid values. And by the way, so let me finish this real quick. So binding proteins works the same way, okay? It's your body's way of conserving, extending the half-life of the thyroid hormone that it makes. It binds to the T3, T4, mostly to the T4. T3 is a really short half-life, okay? It sort of gets converted on demand. It doesn't last very long in the body. I think it's several hour half-life. Whereas T4, the half-life is like 9 or 10 days. So it's a very long half-life. It's actually a longer half-life than pretty much any other hormone your body makes. The thyroid hormone your body made last night, half of it will still be available in 9 or 10 days. Okay, so it's a very slow release thing. Real quickly, I should have explained this. All these hormones bind to receptors, okay? So testosterone, estradiol, I didn't talk about DHT, but that's okay. Progesterone, thyroid, they all bind to what we call receptors. Does anybody know anything about this concept at all? Okay. So a receptor is like, every cell has a receptor, and it binds because everything in the body happens because of negative and positive charges. Everything. Like, all of it's negative and positive charges. Okay? This is the same way. It's floating around, the hormone floats along in the blood, it passes near a receptor, binds to it for minutes or hours, depending on the type of hormone it is. What does it do when it's bound? It sends a signal. Basically, it activates a DNA sequence that's inside the cell, and that is basically like turning on software. And it's going to do something, depending on what the hormone is and what it does. Think of it in terms of almost like a key. Like you put the key in the lock, you turn the lock's going to do something. Then you take the key out, and then you're done, and then the lock is no longer active. Okay? It's kind of like that. You're just basically turning on a piece of software in a cell. An instruction set is made, whether that's to build something, or to recover something, or to store something, which is kind of like what insulin does. Then it's switched off, and it's no longer active. It's a really crude way of explaining it, but that's basically what they're doing. I'm going to fly through the hormone replacement part. I advise all of you to stay off of hormone replacement unless you need it. You should do the best you can with your lifestyle first, okay? It's a quick fix. If it's done competently, it can work well. I say that as someone who is on hormone replacement. My thyroid's been trashed since my mid-20s, and I took minerals and all sorts of supplements and did all sorts of things to try to avoid it, but after like 3 years of almost total insomnia, I quit. And I take thyroid hormone replacement and testosterone. But I do advise live a healthy lifestyle first, okay? Do the best you can. You're always going to probably sort of feel better if you have exogenous hormones, because you can have a man on high testosterone just feels very well, okay? I feel great. But I don't advise taking a drug that you don't need, okay? You might feel great without it. And in my case, there was certain chemical factors and things from my childhood that are probably strong contributors to what happened in my case. So, men, how's it diagnosed? It's all blood draws. Okay, you get a blood draw in the morning while you're fasted, checks your testosterone, your estradiol, things like that. Really that simple. Just like you would when you normally get your blood drawn in the morning when you're fasted. It's just you get your doctor, or you can order it yourself. You want to get it tested at least twice, at least 2 weeks apart, because these values go up and down. Right? So you might have a good day or a bad day. You don't want to start taking something because of one. It's just like blood pressure. We don't diagnose high blood pressure off of one reading. We diagnose high blood pressure over multiple readings over weeks. Testosterone, you want to at least have 2 readings at least 2 weeks apart. I would actually advise a month or 2 apart. Treatment, there are injections, creams, and pellets. In both cases, for men and women, pellets stink. You should never do it. I've heard horror stories, including infections and things like that, and the fact that you get a product in your body that gives you a really, really long half-life. It's like a 30-day half-life that they want to give you quarterly. So you feel great for a while, and then around month 2, you start feeling horrible, and you feel worse than before treatment in the 3rd month. It's absolutely awful, and they literally like cut you. It's in the lower back. They cut you with a scalpel. They stick a pellet in, and they sew you back up. And it also happens to be right at your belt line. So you can imagine how that feels, and sometimes that gets infected. It's a wound that you basically have that takes 2 weeks to heal, so you can't do activity. So every quarter you're looking at 2 weeks of inactivity. The infections can be very painful. And if you got the wrong amount, well, now you just got to ride this baby out. Totally sucks. There's nothing redeeming about it. Every doctor that's selling it to you, it's a very expensive product. That's why they're selling it, because they make way more money. Injections are the way to go in most cases. You do a weekly or maybe twice a week shot, depending on what makes you feel well. If you don't like needles, get over it. If you need it, you need it. You will live longer if you need it. Okay? So your quality of life will be drastically better, as I can attest. There are creams as well. It's kind of a niche product. I don't usually advise going that route. It's also like, why would you want to apply a cream daily when you can do a shot weekly? It's actually easier to deal with because the shot takes 2 minutes, if that. You can do it in your bathroom. Or while you drive in the car, which I've done. It's that easy. It's just like whatever. Male, yes, it can cause infertility in men, but this can be mitigated with, you add other hormones you can take. You can literally take luteinizing hormone as well in an injection. So if you're someone that still wants to maintain fertility, you can. Yes, it will shut you down, but you can take other drugs to mitigate. It doesn't necessarily always shut you down too. I know lots of men that are on testosterone replacement that don't take anything extra, and they're still pretty fertile. So the thing to remember is it only takes one, right? So just because you reduce your sperm count from 20 million to 1 million, you still got a 1 in 1 million chance every time. So it's still pretty good. A lot of places are saying that they have pills that will help you with testosterone replacement. These are serum selective estrogen receptor modulators. It's basically a synthetic estrogen product that attempts to block those estrogen receptors all over the body and trick your body into thinking that it has lower amounts of hormone than it does. Well, all those things that I said estrogen does that are good for you stops doing a lot of those things because you're blocking those receptors, and basically you block it with, think of it in terms of like a blank key that goes in. It sends no signal. But it occupies that slot so that the signaling that you need to occur doesn't occur. I've heard of men that have taken these for several months at a time, personally talked to them. I told you estrogen is active in the eyes. They can no longer drive at night. They lost their ability to drive at night because their eyes stopped regenerating while they were on this drug, and they lost their night vision. And it's never going to come back. Women, similar thing. You diagnose a similar way, although you need to know where you are in the cycle. Generally, it's advised that you get it right before ovulation, the test, because that's when things are the most sort of predictable level. But you can test any time. You just need to know where you are. And most doctors, by the way, have no clue how any of this stuff works. So I do advise there are a few online. I only actually know two online places that will treat women competently. Or you can talk to me if you have questions. But I have never thus far met a primary care provider that knows how to treat women competently. They'll just put a woman on estrogen, shut down her testosterone, and she'll feel horrible. And your SHB, sexual hormone binding globulin, goes through the roof when you take estrogen pills, and you lose the benefits of testosterone because it's all bound. So it doesn't work. Injections, creams, pills, pellets. Again, I advise no pellets. For women, injection works really well, especially with the testosterone and estradiol. What's great with women is they inject that much. It's very little. You don't need much. So it's very easy. And then creams can work. Pills, the only pill that's really valid to use is progesterone if you need it. Progesterone pills are very, very effective. And you take those, remember I said that you get progesterone after ovulation, you have it for about 2 weeks. You take it for 2 weeks. And then as soon as you bleed, you stop. Okay? I don't expect you guys to remember this, but just to give you some idea. Go ahead.
This doesn't apply over here, but for women that are...
Yeah, for a friend. Yeah.
No, for women that get beyond the menopause, how does that look like for them?
Yeah, it can actually look the same. You can treat a woman pretty much the same way, only you don't have to worry about her cycle anymore. So usually you just keep the testosterone and estrogen levels the same, and then progesterone is optional. But in general, so when a woman goes through menopause, so I advise pretty much, in my opinion, I'm not a doctor, so this isn't medical advice, this is for your information, but I would advise any woman post-menopause to be on hormone replacement because it reduces the risk of certain things, including osteoporosis, dementia, and breast cancer, and cardiovascular disease. All of those go up drastically post-menopause in women. Drastically. If you look at the numbers, so men get more heart attacks than women until menopause. Then women, the risk factor goes way up to men or beyond. And you're just going to feel better, honestly. Fertility, most women stay fertile on hormone replacement. That's the short story. Some aren't. That's easily mitigated. That can be taken care of. And that's why I recommended either way. You see, I recommended for testosterone, estradiol, injections work really well, progesterone, cream, or pills, usually pills. I have 15 minutes to get through the next part of this. Sorry, I'm trying. Metabolic health. So metabolic health is generally going to be determined by your insulin sensitivity. right? So what do I mean by that? Remember I talked about earlier about how much you can do with the hormone, right? You might be sensitive to it or not. This is how sensitive are you to insulin in general, okay? From this stems almost everything else about your health. Your insulin sensitivity determines how competently your body handles energy. So you can imagine the kind of problems this creates if your body's bad at handling energy, because everything in the body is energy intake and output, ultimately. So there is an HPTA relationship, interestingly enough. So this is part of why I will again say that I don't like fad diets, and carnivore is a great example of this, as is keto. When you have lower average insulin values, your HPTA will become downregulated, because one of the ways that the body determines that feast or famine scenario is based on how many carbs you take in and how much insulin you're releasing. When you're releasing less, the body goes, oh, it must be more famine scenario, let's conserve. So your hormone values will tend to reduce. What triggers insulin? Mostly carbs, a little bit proteins, fat is not needed. So what I want you to think in terms of, so you've got your cell. This is commonly like a skeletal muscle cell. You've got the receptor, right? Insulin binds to it, and it sends signals, okay? Now, think of this as like your garage door opener, right? The garage door opens. Yes, that's a garage door. It's okay. All right? This makes the door open. And then protein and carbs can enter. When the insulin is not bound to the cell, this door is shut. That simple. However, fats can pass through this door at any time. They don't need insulin. They just enter freely. An interesting thing about that, though, is if only fats are entering all the time, yet another reason why I hate those kinds of diets, this is a really crude way to explain what seems to be happening. It seems like they clog things up. Not that I'm saying all fats are bad, I eat fats. But if you're eating a lot of fats and not enough of the other stuff, essentially, this isn't just a clean door, it's actually, you can look up scan, or like microscope, like sort of depictions of it. It's actually sort of a series, it's a compartment that opens and widens, and there's a bunch of sort of tendrils that sort of usher in the nutrients that they sort of pass through. Fats get caught in those things, slows the intake down. So you just want to have other things with the fats. And carbs seem to help a lot because they aggressively open this up and create an influx of, and by the way, salt and water also enter with this as well. Cells need salt, that's how things work. So that's why when I've noticed before, sometimes you eat carbs and you kind of bloat, right? That's not like a bad thing necessarily. Where you bloat is actually what's important, not that you bloat. But carbs are hydrophilic. They're attracted to water. So wherever they go, water goes with them. If you're good at handling, if you have good insulin sensitivity and your body's competent metabolically, this water will go to your muscles, which is a good thing. If your body's bad at handling it, this water will stay in your abdomen. Not so good. IGF-1 conversion. IGF-1, so remember I told you everything's broken down? So when your body, let's say you have lunch. You eat your lunch, you have your insulin release, this happens, okay? There's going to be some leftover insulin. Your liver looks at that leftover insulin and converts it to IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1. This is the primary sort of healing hormone in the body for soft tissues. Not for like muscle recovery and growth. It's not very active in muscles. It's more like your skin. It's your connective tissues. It's your eyes. It's basically everywhere. And this is actually what makes children grow. Children have crazy high IGF-1 values. IGF-1 values that if we see them in an adult, we assume they have some sort of disease. That's part of what causes gigantism or whatever it is. Agromegaly is also another term, where you just grow and grow and grow. It's because it's people that they never down-regulated properly. They just have crazy high IGF-1 levels, and they just grow and turn into large human beings. Growth hormone, what does it do? It triggers the release of triggers an excessive conversion of insulin to IGF-1. It occurs a couple hours into your sleep. Okay? Children have tons of it. Adults have a little bit, but you need some. It actually helps you sleep better too. And remember, I've talked about some of these things that happen in the morning and evening, right? So you get your hormone release in the morning, your sex hormone release in the morning, you've got HGH a couple hours into sleep, you've got about 5 hours into sleep, you've got your thyroid hormones. Imagine how well or poorly all of this works if your circadian rhythm is intact or not intact. If your circadian rhythm is not intact, all of this breaks down. All of it doesn't work the way it should because the brain doesn't know if it's coming or going. Insulin resistance. What are the consequences? Usually leads to unfat safe storage or visceral fat storage outside of the abdominal wall or all over, as long as it's not inside this compartment, is a lot safer. Also vascular damage. Insulin resistance destroys the smaller blood vessels. This is why type 2 diabetics, anyone with insulin resistance, they lose their fingers later in life, nose, things like that. It's actually a very simple explanation for how this works. You have high blood glucose levels because this doesn't work right, so the energy doesn't enter the cell, it just stays in blood circulation. Glucose is a crystal, and it's abrasive. And when it chronically at high levels scrapes against the walls of your blood vessels, it basically scars them over time. It's really that simple, and you can imagine how much more it scars them when you have high blood pressure. So you have those two things, you have two very significant factors that are destroying your blood vessels, and so you have that necrosis because you just have a lack of blood supply because the blood vessels get full. They get clogged basically of like scar tissue and things like that. Brain damage. Triglyceride glucose index associated with cognitive decline and dementia risk. Basically, imagine what happens to your brain when it can't handle energy properly. Dementia is becoming known as type 3 diabetes. And America is for some reason like the last country in the West to recognize this. This is sort of like well established in Europe. It's basically insulin resistance of the brain. Your brain loses its capability to competently handle energy. Inflammation, treating insulin resistance reduces chronic inflammation. This is sort of well known and established. You don't handle this well, all the damage that gets done, you have chronic inflammation all over, joint pain, etc. I've worked with people that they start training and they're like, man, I still got joint pain, but they don't want to change their diet or whatever. Finally, they change their diet, then the joint pain starts getting better. You have to do both. What you do in the gym does not mitigate all the other risks you take in life. HPTA. So here's an area where the hypothalamus pituitary testes axis works differently in men than it does in women. So low testosterone leads to insulin resistance in both men and women. That's true in both. It's particularly pronounced in men. However, women who are insulin resistant, so if you start with the insulin resistance, that's what tends to lead to PCOS. In most cases, PCOS is a lifestyle disease. It's not, that's why we didn't have it 100 years ago, for the most part. That is generally caused by insulin resistance. You lose the weight, you eat healthy, you fix the insulin resistance, usually everything goes okay. Why? Because it's hijacking that feast or famine and it works differently in women than it works in men. It doesn't work this way in men. But in women, that feast or famine scenario plays out like the following. You have chronically high insulin values because you have chronically high blood glucose values because you can't put the energy away. Okay? So it appears that the hypothalamus in women reads those high values and goes like, we must have lots of energy, let's build and do all sorts of fun things, and makes a ton of testosterone. Sometimes as much testosterone as a man. That's what leads to virilization in women that have PCOS. Generally, again, then this study that I have here, that UK study, basically they just looked at reduction in body weight. These people didn't even do a holistic let's make everything healthier. It was just losing weight resolves it in most cases, even if you didn't even get that healthy necessarily. Insulin sensitivity preservation factors. So this is going to be, yeah, I made it. We're going to talk about how to design all these things the last 3 weeks, how to sleep well, how to train, how to design a diet, right? But just know this for now. The factors of preservation of your insulin sensitivity is going to come down to sleep. 7 hours is a minimum. But some of us need like 9. That's okay if that's you. And then there are some weirdos, one of you might be in this room, that needs 4 hours of sleep and you're fine. I get it, that's fine. Most of you that think you aren't. I've heard a lot of people like, oh, I'm fine. No, you survived. You survived stupidity. But like me riding around in a motorcycle with my helmet off doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It just means that I survived. You shouldn't take that as a positive data point, okay? It is what it is. A big factor is evening artificial light. A big factor. That circadian rhythm stuff doesn't work very well. Your body doesn't know it's time to go to sleep when you're around artificial light until 5 minutes before bed. Specifically blue lights. It's even worse if you haven't been outside. So if you haven't been outside, your body didn't get daytime signaling, and then the reduction of it didn't lead to nighttime signaling. So if you never got daytime signaling, and then you never even got nighttime signaling, what do you think your hormones are going to do that night? Nothing good. Because your brain doesn't know. Basically, think of all these signals as they activate software in your brain. Okay? Your brain goes, oh, it's time for this. This is what we're going to do now. But your brain responds to those signals. This fundamentally, by the way, is why astronauts get so unhealthy in space. We thought it's diet. They feed them a very healthy diet. We thought, oh, it's lack of gravity. So we made, you guys might have seen this, that resistance training machine that they have where they work out, they do squats and everything. It helps. Every single one. Now, by the way, astronauts are the finest physical specimens in the world. The rigors, now, they're all like PhDs and stuff, but actually they're all physical specimens. These are some of the most fit people in the world. Yeah, they don't compete in sports, but the rigors they have to go through, their bodies are checked out because if NASA or any other organization is going to spend millions of dollars to send them on a job for a couple months, you better not be about to die. Right? So they're invested in these people. And so the most healthy people, they go up in space, what happens? Cognitive decline sets in rapidly. Muscle loss, rapidly. Bone loss, rapidly. They're eating all the right stuff. They're resistance training. They're sleeping. What's going on? They're going around the sun several times per day. Their body doesn't know what's going on. It's really that simple. That's why all these procedures they follow for even menial tasks, they have checklists. These are all some of the highest IQ people in the world. They don't need a checklist for how to clean the toilet, or they shouldn't. But after a month in space, they sure do. Because of these things become dysregulated. Because they're exposed to radiation and things like that you're only supposed to get during the day. They're surrounded by electronics, so there's all sorts of EMF disruption. That's okay to happen during the day, shouldn't happen at night. Up until about 100 years ago, we didn't get EMF during the nighttime. Now we do because we have wireless networks and we have our phones and all these other things, which you can mitigate all this stuff. We'll get into that later, but just be aware of it for now. There's a lot of EMF emitted by the sun, tons of it. That's the signal for daytime. Humans were created that way to receive that signaling. But when you receive that signaling at night, which astronauts do because they're surrounded by electronics in a metal tube that turns into an EMF echo chamber, they become horribly dysregulated. And then they get back down to earth and all this stuff goes away. Fundamentally, it's because the sleep factor gets eliminated. All this other stuff, they got fitness and cardio, they got resistance training, they got a great diet. They don't even have the option of eating junk food because they don't really give it to them. You can't go off diet there because you have the food that's provided for you. You don't get a choice. They're eating great. You can't mitigate the fact, though, that your circadian signaling is completely broken. So with that, I'll leave you aside from any questions. Anybody have any questions before we close out? Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for sticking it out. I hope that was helpful. I know it was a lot of nerdy stuff. Every week going forward is going to be this way for a while. I know it's hard to absorb, but I'm creating a foundation so that later on we can learn how to apply it. The last 3 weeks will probably be the best. Because that'll be, how do I design a lifestyle? Because we all have different needs. You've got family needs, you've got work needs, you've got other things, so you need to design something. That's why a cookie cutter is not going to work for anybody in this room. I'll talk about what should you take into consideration to design a lifestyle that works for you. Let's pray real quick and then we can be dismissed. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the time to dig into this topic. Thank you for everyone being here and their interest in just in their health and taking this seriously. I pray now that you'd be with us as we go to worship. Bless Dave, the message he's preaching, and everything. In your name, amen.